Hello, all. Today I'm presenting the production equilibrium horizon theory, which can explain a few things, particularly regarding minimum wage. Now, the Journal of Economic Perspectives in early 2021 published a paper by Dr. Alan Manning discussing the inability to locate expected unemployment increases when increasing minimum wage. Now, I had been working on a paper for quite a while, arguing that the ratio of minimum wage to per capita GDP was the sole determinant of the baseline of earnings inequality. Now, this makes some sense. GDP is basically everything produced, and per capita GDP is that divided by all the people. Productivity is measured by GDP per hours worked, but the two generally move together. In any case, raising the minimum wage by any measure causes wages to come closer together, and because wages come closer together as minimum wage increases, existing technology must become more cost-effective, leading to reorganization of the workforce. In other words, rather than unemployment going up, people end up in different jobs. Those jobs use technology that saves on labor, and when you put all this together, there's more stuff produced for the same hours of work done, and so all wages can increase in terms of purchasing power, or real terms, as economists call it. Now, putting aside the economics crash course, I need to explain how individual people and businesses interact with this principle. So let's try with a thought experiment. Imagine a worker needs 5 hours to make some number of tables. If we have people mine metal, refine it, build a machine, ship it, make power to run it, maintain it, operate it, over the lifetime of that machine, the same tables can be made with 1 hour of work. And we call these low GDP laborers, taking more labor to make the same thing, and high GDP labor, they take more time to make less stuff, less time to make more stuff. Assume that 1 hour of high GDP labor averages $30 an hour wage. If we pay low GDP workers $5 an hour, then that number of tables costs $25. High GDP labor, it costs $30. So even though one business can make 5 times as many tables with the same workers, if that business tries to charge, say, $27 for a table, they are out $3 a table. They lose money. But the one that takes 5 times as many workers to make the same tables, they charge $27, they make a $2 profit. Which one of these is going out of business? Well, you walk in somewhere and you see a table for $30 next to the same table for $25 or $27. You're going to spend an extra $3. You're not going to spend extra money to buy the same thing. They can't compete on price. They go out of business. So before I came up with a thought experiment, I actually came up with this equation, and I came up with it by drawing a bunch of boxes. That big box on the left side is 1 hour of labor, and it has to be bigger or equal to the size of all the small gray boxes on the right, each of course producing the big square that they're inside. And this inequality just says that when the wage ratio is greater than or equal to the labor ratio, nothing changes. We keep doing it the old inefficient way. So I call this the productivity equilibrium inequality. And when something changes to make this no longer true, it's called crossing the productivity equilibrium horizon. There are 2 ways to cross the productivity equilibrium horizon. One way is to have enough technological innovation that moving to the efficient method is cost effective because you need so much less labor to do it. Now, this affects the right-hand side of the inequality, which is the labor ratio. This occurs whenever any new technology comes out, whenever any more productive means of doing something becomes materially available. The other way to cross the horizon is to increase the cost of low GDP labor until it's cheaper to just use high-tech, low-labor methods. That's what happens when you raise minimum wage. And this affects the wage ratio, the left-hand side of the inequality. Now, both of these operate in the same mechanism. They knock this inequality out of balance, and then we adopt technology that exists. Technological innovation can create new technology, raising wages can't. Now, that immediately makes minimum wage affect the productivity growth process. It's not unique in its effects on employment, so it can't increase unemployment as such. The PEI tells us that technological innovation will cause productivity growth only when workers won't accept lower wages or when they hit the minimum wage. And economists will describe this as reducing the demand for low-wage labor whenever high-wage labor is a cheaper substitute. This mechanism also means lower minimum wage reduces the demand for higher-paid workers, since it has to be cheaper to hire them than to hire low-wage workers. A big enough minimum wage increase crosses the PEH, causing capital accumulation as observed by Harris, Tosi, and Lindner in Hungary, and by Dustman et al. In Germany, where the lowest wage regions saw the greatest productivity growth when a new minimum wage law was passed. Schmidt suggests wage compression happens because employers might delay giving high-paid workers wage raises or cancel their bonuses. But if your $27 table becomes a $29 table because minimum wage went up, it's still cheaper than the $30 table. Rather than a cut in higher real wages by delaying raises, basic supply and demand theory shows no change in demand for high-paid workers until minimum wage rises sufficiently. Likewise, a shortage of high-skilled labor can only drive up the high-skill wages until the two sides of the PEI are equal, at which point both high and low productivity competitors exist in the market. This is why technology and automation can't make low-wage workers permanently unemployable, and why universal college and vocational education increases GDP. 40% of workers leave their jobs every year. When they move on to better things or retire out, employers may just not backfill positions. When technological innovation keeps pushing wages down, the labor ratio gets bigger and bigger and bigger until many workers are laid off all at once. A higher minimum wage may actually protect against spikes in unemployment rather than increasing it. Similarly, big businesses can handle large investments that small businesses just can't afford. Over 50% of employment in 1970, when minimum wage started falling relative to per capita GDP, was in small business, measured as having under 250 employees. Now, measured at having under 500, that figure is only 49%. It's a weaker conjecture requiring more examination, but a higher minimum wage might actually protect small businesses. This theory allows a more complete general equilibrium theory, a type of theory explaining how everything in the global economy functions, and none of it violates basic theory. It explains so many things economists simply don't understand, or from which they expect exactly the opposite outcome. All of these things today are non-obvious to economists, at least according to recent literature. Some of these things aren't just unexplained, but not even suggested because it wouldn't make sense under current economic theory. Meanwhile, to disprove the theory here, you have to first disprove supply and demand, which is the same thing as disproving all of economics. The increase in productivity caused by the adoption of existing but previously not cost-effective technology increases buying power represented by every hour worked, which in turn increases total buying power. If people aren't working, you have a monetary policy problem. People looking to work, people looking to buy. There's no buying and selling happening there, despite there being buyers and sellers, only because you don't have the paper money giving you permission to buy and sell. That's the theory behind stimulus used in the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-19 recession to create jobs when unemployment is high too. I want to conclude by pointing out that this work, including the empirical study that served as a precursor to all of this, was done without high-level math or complex econometrics. The work presented here is pure theory, based on logical propositions and rigorous testing, not by dropping the most significant 1% of the data and seeing if the results reverse, but by proving its consistency with accepted theory and with observed evidence. People who have great ideas simply have them. They don't need special credentials. Sometimes they don't even need specialized education. Many Nobel Prize winners didn't study economics, including the first woman who ever got a Nobel Prize in economics. You don't need a PhD to do something great. You only need to accept when you're wrong and keep fixing it until you're, let's call it less wrong. Nothing's perfect after all.